Welcome back to the studio. Today we're going to be hopefully finishing up on the Radiant Garden quilt, and to do that I'm going to be working with Panto and a corner unit to do a border corner. And of course when I chose the design for this quilt, I was focusing on the center of the quilt, and I chose Heart Fern because it was a really nice square pattern, didn't interlock, and that worked really well with the clipping function that we used for that port. I didn't realize when I got to the border section that the corners were not symmetrical. It's more like an L shape, which only slightly made this step going to be more complicated. To that end, I will say that I'm going to do two videos that are going to be released fairly close together. One is going to be just on the computer, and it's just going to be me talking with the IQ stick program. It's just going to be me showing you how to use the border corners in the IQ program. And I'm going to be using one of two free digital Panto designs. One of them is called Rosebud and the other one is called Fall Foliage. Both of those are free to download. They're also free as paper Pantos if you want to print them at home. They have the corner element and the paper Panto, the joining element. And in one case it's more like just a symmetrical corner. In the case of the Rosebud, again, it's almost like an L shape. So I'm going to show those on the computer, how to do that, because it'll be a little bit easier to see up close the steps that you take. Almost every time you do a border corner, it's going to be a little bit different, the steps that you take, based on the size of your quilt and the size of the unit. What I will say up front is kind of the way that doing Pantos from the back, it's much easier to do organic shapes with a Panto, especially free motion, than it is doing geometric shapes. Geometric designs on the border with the corner are going to be more difficult, and if you're going to attempt those and get them to match up really well, then you really want to plan the quilt out with that in mind, the size of that digital design in mind from the beginning, so that the quilt will finish the size that the design needs to be, so that you don't have to distort it or stretch it. So you're really working from the back to the front rather than the front to the back in that case. So I'm going to bring you in closer so you can see my three little PDFs. Two of them are going to be the free designs, and you'll can look for or will see the videos for these on the either YouTube or Facebook. And then I'm going to show you the Heart Fern. After I show you these, then we're going to actually go over to my tablet on the machine, and I'm going to program this in. I will tell you now that it's quite a few steps with this, and I will tell you why now. Because the L-shaped patterns cannot just be copy and pasted, you have to kind of do all four corners and then fit the middle of the border into size. It takes a little bit longer because you have to do each of the four sides rather than, well, you can copy and paste two of them, but it takes a little bit longer than just copy and pasting all of it. But you'll see that when I get to it. And with any of the things with IntelliQuilter, there's more than one way to do something, and so I'm showing you the way that I've learned so far. I just don't hear a lot about people doing borders and corners, so it's something I wanted to share, and so that's one reason we're doing it. The other reason is because I really like them, and I wanted to learn more how to do that as well. Just like the whole cloth quilts, it was something new to learn, and this is something new as well. In the whole cloth quilts, I will say they come in as a package. You could either load the whole cloth quilt as just one big size that loads everything, or you could load it in rows, which makes it really easy. In this case, we are loading these in sections, in little blocks, and so it gives you more control, but it also means there's more steps. This is one of the free designs. It is the border corner. This is called Rosebud. It's an organic shape. So if we have to distort it by stretching it a little bit to make it fit the size of the border, it's not going to be as noticeable as it would be if this were a digital design. Because this is a free downloadable design, if you just wanted to play with something, this is something you could play with. It is a free design if you wanted to print it out on a paper design, or if you have a digital, you could print it out as digital, as I did also, and it comes with it in multiple formats. This particular one is called Fall Foliage, and this is nice. It could be used for an autumnal quilt, but also for a oriental style quilt, because this maple leaf is used so often in oriental designs. This one is more of a symmetrical corner, and I think it would be a little bit easier to do because you could copy and paste once you get the sides done. So I may do the first video on the computer using this pattern because it would be the easiest. Again, this is free to use. It can be used downloaded as a paper to print on your printer, or as a digital design in multiple formats. But ultimately, this is the heart fern that I used in the body of the quilt. We use this as the clip with the clip function. It doesn't interlock, so it made it really great to fit into the body of the quilt. It did not sew out of the body of the quilt, so we didn't have any worry about, I forget what the name of it is, where it sews off. I can't remember. Anyway, this is the corner for the border, and you can see it's shaped like an L. So for this reason, I basically have to use this shape in all four corners before I even know how long to make the rest of the border unit. You can see in the example that they give that they used just one repeat. In my case, I need to use two, join them, and then stretch them a little bit. So you'll see me do that. So I'm going to go over to the tablet, and we're going to input this, but I'm going to keep the tablet all the way to the front of the machine, which is the incorrect place for me to be programming. But I'm doing that so you'll be able to see what I'm doing on the machine. And then I will just save the design and bring it back in and reload my start position. Before we start, we need two really good measurements. One of them is the width and length of the quilt on the outside edge. The other is the place where the outside border meets the inside border, because that is where we're going to place this border design. And so those measurements need to be as accurate as possible. So I'm going to use Design Sew Quilt to start new. I'm going to replace the existing project. I'm going to be working with block patterns. I'm going to enter my rectangle manually. So my first is the outside measurement. I'm going to be doing 58 inches by 72 inches. And that's the outside parameter of the quilt. Now I'm going to hit finished. I'm going to add a block, standard block. I'm going to enter the rectangle manually. That one's going to be 43 by 57 and a half. And you can see I have two center markings here. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see my two blocks. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to put my grid is on. I'm going to have my the snap is on. Okay. So I'm going to hit move, and I'm going to touch the block. No, sorry. Zoom off. I'm going to touch my block so that the two centers are overlapping, and that creates my perfect border. You have the body of the quilt and the outside border. So I'm going to zoom in just a little bit to make that bigger. Okay, you can see the body of the quilt and the outside border. So now I'm going to hit finished. We have our quilt to work on. We're going to hit finished, and we're going to start working on our pattern. I've already tried this like 3 times, so I've learned a few things. Each time you do this, it's going to be a little bit different. Each pattern is going to be a little bit different. What I've learned about this particular pattern I'm using, it's not symmetrical on the left and the right side bilaterally, so I cannot rotate this pattern on the x-axis or the y-axis. I just have to let it go around the corner as it goes. So I've hit add pattern. It's going to be a block pattern. I'm going to use the current block. I'm going to go to my downloads and hit H for heart fern, and I'm going to select it and hit continue, and it's come in at a scale of 240. I've done this several times, so I know about 85% works good. So I'm going to go ahead and move that into one of the corners. I might even scale that down a little bit and move it a little bit further away. Okay, so I'm finished. I'm going to hit copy pattern and continue. So I'm going to move that out of the way, and I'm going to hit rotation, and I'm going to just rotate that. I'm not flipping it on the X or the Y. So I'm going to try and get that as straight as possible. Move that into the corner. Finished. Copy pattern. I'm going to take this one up here, rotate it again. It'll be a little easier to see if it's crooked once I get it in the corner. Finished. Copy pattern. Take this over, rotate it. Now I'll tell you why I couldn't do a flip on the X or Y, because this pattern is not bilaterally symmetrical. So when I brought in the body part of the design, the pattern didn't match up. You could see that it was going in the wrong direction. So I'm going to do it this way and try not to flip the design, just rotate it so that it looks like it's all one design. It's not sections. So I'm going to hit finished. We're going to add another pattern, block pattern. We're using the same block. We're going to bring in heart fern again. We want to make sure that we differentiate between the 5-inch border and the 10-inch panto. So I'm going to use the 5-inch border, it's going to bring it in super scaled, so I'm going to adjust the scale on that. And move it. And I'm going to zoom in so I could see. And I just want to overlap the start and finish. So I'm going to hit finished, copy pattern. Now I have a second one of the borders. I'm going to zoom in again so I could line those up. Finished, copy pattern, zoom in again, bring that down, and hit finished. And now you can see we just have a little bit further to go. So what I'm going to do is combine patterns, this one to this one, continue, stop to cut threads if we need to. Now I'm going to combine patterns, this one to this one, continue, stop to cut threads, and I'm going to modify the pattern, and I'm going to select this one, and I'm going to adjust the height a little bit and move this one's off a little bit, so we need to adjust the height. So I'm just going to keep playing with this a little bit until I can get that the right size so that the stop and ends meets both sides of that piece. Okay, it took me several minutes to really work with the scaling of the height until it met the border corner on both sides. So I really wanted to be patient with that and do it. But I've done that, so I'm going to hit finish and hit copy pattern, and copied that. Now I'm going to take this over and I'm going to hit rotation and rotate that up, and I should be able to move that right into place. And I could go ahead and zoom in. And I can see my rotations off just a little bit. And the rotation looks like it's still off just a little. But you can see this is finicky work, but we're going to just go ahead and repeat this process that we did, working on one of the sides until we get the top and bottom done as well. So I'm going to zoom out. You can see now that we have the two sides. I'm going to go ahead and do the top and bottom. But the process is seeing if you have how many links you could fit. You may have to take some and make them smaller, or you may have to make them a little bit bigger. That's the process. I'm going to go ahead and continue on with that until we get the full border, and then I'll go ahead and save this as a finished quilt. So save it as a quilt, and then I can go ahead and start it as a new project. But I think I'll show you just when I get the top and bottom done. You can see I added the top and bottom. All I did was add 2 blocks. I had to just slightly increase them so it went a little bit quicker, and I brought it back down. Keep in mind that this little CurlyQ is always on the outside edge of the quilt. It's never on the inside, and that way the design always flows the way it's supposed to. And as I said, this is not bilaterally symmetrical, and so that's why you can't flip on the X or Y axis. Also, I combined the patterns already for these 3 sections and for these 2, so I'm going to just do this next section, which is these with this one, and combine patterns, this one with this one, and it's just going to be a continuous line. And these sections here I'm not going to combine because I don't think I have enough space in my throat space to do those anyway. So I'm going to go ahead at this point and hit finished. And I'm going to save this because I didn't record this in the right position. So I'm just going to save it as a quilt. And I'm going to come up with a clever name now. And this was, I'm going to call it My Heart Fern. My Heart Fern border. I'm going to save it in my works in progress and touch pattern to see its properties. I don't need to see it, so I'm going to go ahead and close this out, and then I'm going to reopen the computer back in the corner, and I can actually start getting this quilt ready to sew out. I also have to change the quilt thread because I want the border to sew out in green. Okay, I did a little basting around the space between the inner and outer border all the way around. Just wanted to get that tucked into place. And I have my machine all the way at the very tip of the outer border. So I'm going to hit Design Sew Quilt, Edit Existing. I'm going to do Work in Progress. And I'm going to select my Heart Fern border, and we're going to save the work in progress, and we're going to hit continue. We're going to move the needle to a reference point and touch OK, and we're going to hit Sew Quilt. Excuse me. This first pattern is going to be, we're going to start over on the left hand side, and we're going to sew up all the way across and down. That's what's supposed to happen, and that's what I hope will happen. course, this is the first time that I've done a border like this, so all things are possible, and I'm hopeful, but we'll see what we get. So before I hit start, I'm going to go ahead and put my side tension clamps on, and then we're going to hit start and see exactly what we get. There's always something unexpected in life. So what was unexpected today was that the length of this side portion, the first corner, was longer than my available space, design space. So what I had to do was move the quilt down and start over. I know that when we get to the top, I'm going to get an obstruction notice, and I'm going to have to roll the quilt down and do a realignment, and then do all the way across the top and down. I won't get the same problem on the other side because it's not as long on the other side. It will just go across the top and stop. So there's going to be the same problem down in the opposite corner. The design is going to be too long, so we're going to have to just allow it to give us the obstruction notice, and then move the quilt down as needed. And there's our obstruction notice. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the needle in, roll the quilt down just enough to allow it to finish sewing this area, and go ahead and hit the realign and restart. After I sewed the top yesterday, the one piece that I had connected, I quit for the day. So I'm picking up today where I left off, and I did a realignment. That part just, anyway, I did sew that part, it's just showing up green. So I'm going to start here, but remember I joined those three pieces together so I could flip them over here. But I know I'm not going to be able to sew all three of those, so I'm just going to let the machine sew down as far as it will go. When it gets an obstruction notice, I'm just going to roll up the quilt until we get to the end of these three feathers, and then I'm just going to keep going all the way down around that way. So I didn't disconnect them, I didn't split them. I'm just going to go until I get the obstruction, roll up the quilt, realign, sew it again, obstruction, roll up the quilt, realign, and I'm just going to sew in a circle around the border until we get it done. So I'm all ready to go. I have manual on, I've realigned, and I'm ready. So I'm just going to hit sew quilt, and of course it's going somewhere crazy. So I'm going to hit restart. There we go. Okay, it's asking me to stop to cut the threads and hit restart. Since it's stopped here, I'm going to go ahead and roll the quilt up and realign, since it's at an in-between part, and it'll be really easy to realign from there. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit the start button again. Okay, I have the top all the way down the side done. Now I'm ready to do this long connector at the bottom. I know I'm not going to be able to do it all at once, but I'm going to go ahead and select this next part to sew. Then I'm going to roll up the quilt and realign, and then we'll hit the select button. So I'm going to hit sew quilt, select the next pattern, which is this long section, and hit continue. We're going to do a continuous sewing, and we're going to hit sew quilt, but I want to go ahead and stop because I have to realign, but I'm going to bring it back to where it was and drop the needle in the quilt and roll the quilt up as far as I can. I know I won't be able to get all the way down here to the bottom without realigning, but we want to get as far as we can. So we're going to zoom off, have the zoom on, we're going to zoom in, now I'm going to turn the zoom off. I'm going to touch my reference point, hit continue, with the amount of space between the design and the inner border, and this is a little bit close here. It was a little bit better at the top, but we have a good distance between the design and where the binding is going to go as well. We're seeing how it goes around the corner. I already know that my measurement onto the inner border was a little off, and we have a thread break. And so that's really where you have to take the time. They always say measure twice, cut once, measure twice, quilt once. So those are always going to be the important times. I'm going to try and figure out why my thread keeps breaking right at the moment. It seems to have been happening on the bottom here row. I don't know why. But I'm going to keep doing that and advance up a little bit, get a couple of those upward feathers going, and then we'll start back and see where we get to at that last joint. Okay, this is our last part of the feather. This is our target spot. I obviously have no idea how close we'll get because I haven't moved the head of my machine. I'm going to realign for the last time. I'm zooming in so I could get to where we need to be. And we're off and running. This particular piece is a little closer to the edge than some of the others. So my binding might cover up some of that. So it's also going to be a little bit further away. I think I can see that I'm going to be off by about an inch. But we'll know for sure when we get there. Yes, we are off by about an inch. I'm going to try and zoom in and let you see exactly how close or how far apart we got. I'm going to try and go slow because I know it's frustrating when the camera zooms quick. That's as close as I can get it. This is where my finish line was, and this is where my start line was for the other piece. So ideally this should have finished over here. Why did it finish over there when it was connected on the screen? It could have been a matter of the amount of tension that I had on the sides during the roll-up process. I didn't clamp the two sides every time I rolled up the quilt, which I should have done. But the design did meet the top and bottom, so visually I don't think anyone would see that those two lines were supposed to connect. I think what would be more visually jarring is the fact that these are out of line a little bit. And I don't know why that shows up, because that doesn't show up on screen the way that it does on the quilt. But once I take it off the frame, we could look at it again and see if that is really visually apparent and go from there. But overall, I did make the mistake. It should have been a half an inch longer on the design, but it's not bothering me. In fact, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised how it turned out. This could have been disastrously wrong because it needs to be so precise, and it turned out really, I think, pretty good. So I'm happy. The process of doing it was correct. It's just my measurements were a little bit off. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off the frame, and then we can look at it after I get it trimmed. Hey, look what I did. It's finished, except I have to put a sleeve on it, which is going to cover some of the quilting in the back, but that's okay. And I have to pick out a binding, which probably will just be this green batik, because I still have that. And I make the binding and put it on, but my friend whips it down for me. So the two things that we covered in the quilting phase of this were clipping, which means that there's no transition outside of the area that you're quilting in. The transition means that it quilts out and comes back in, and that's where the software program edits the design. Usually it just crops it off into a straight line and allows you to make the design smaller. But if you choose specific designs, you could clip them so that it just does specific repeats. You could stretch them a little bit to fit the size you need, and then it doesn't have to sew outside of the area that you've chosen or delineated in this case. And I used heart fern, and the design just sewed inside the area that I chose. Now the very first row I did, I measured wrong, so it was going to sew outside, and I just had to stop and adjust it. And that particular row does have a little bit of a straight line there. But because these designs that I chose, the ones that work really well with clipping, don't interlock, I was able to go ahead and redo the layout, and you really can't tell from there on. You really can't tell unless you look up close at that I made a mistake. I was the one that made the measuring mistake. Then we went on to the border. This is the first time that I've done borders and corner units as blocks. And again, you have to be really careful with your measurements, and you have to measure both the outside and where the border is going to meet the quilt. And again, my measurement was a little bit off at the bottom. Now across the top it worked beautifully, across the bottom it worked beautifully, but if I had made the measurement like maybe 3/4 of an inch longer, it would have been perfect. But this was my first go at it, so I'm really happy. But aside from that, the quilting design worked beautifully and the software worked beautifully. It was just my measurement that was off. So the quilting looks really good. I really love the way it wraps around the quilt. Did not have to take the quilt off of the frame to accomplish that. Was just able to do that in the software. And I really like the background, the backing as well. I chose the backing based on this. Even though it wasn't a batik fabric, I thought the feel of this little vine matched the feel of the body of the quilt really well. But I'm going to bring the camera in so you could see how this looks on here, because it really shows up well on the back, so you can see the quilting. Okay, I think you can see really well with the side light from the window coming in how the quilting looks. Now we do have the 2 layers of the batting, so I'm hoping that that helps the effect of the batting. But you can see the clipping of the body of the quilt, also how the border element works with the quilting wrapping around just on the border of the quilt. Again, the name of this particular pattern is called Heart Fern, and I am excited the way it turned out. Even though I did do a measurement mistake that affected both parts of that, for me it's always a learning process, but I've been wanting to learn how to do these borders and corners as block units for a long time, and I know that each time that you do that, it's going to be different each time, because each design is going to be slightly different, so how they connect is going to be different, and it does take a little bit of time to get them the way that you want them, but the finished product is well worth the time. So we have the back. I think it looks really good, the quilting on there, and we have the front. I am really excited to get Radiant Garden finished. I'll be happy when we get the sleeve and the binding done. I'm sure I'm going to hang it up here where we have Winter Wonderland hanging right now. Some of the things that were important when doing the clipping block is that you want blocks or pantos that do not interlock, either on the edge or on the top and bottom. These are usually the ones that work really well as borders also, because they run basically flattish on the tops and the sides, and so you don't have any voids where the interlock would be missing. So those work really well for clipping. For borders and corners, the ones that work best as far as getting them in the software are the ones that are organic, like feathers, flowers, leaves. You can do geometric ones, but because you have to play with the sizing of them, either making them wider or taller to get them to meet perfectly, the geometric ones are a little bit harder to do. And if your mind is set that you really want to do a geometric one, keep that in mind when you start the quilt, and make sure that your border finishes to meet the sizing requirements of that panto to begin with. so that it has the equal size of those units. So you're going to want to plan that out, see what the size is from the get-go, the height and the width, and plan that accordingly so that it matches. So I wouldn't be able to do that at this point because I'm just now learning how to do it. But with some experience, you could do that. So as I said, start with organic shapes. The feathers worked pretty good. This is where mine started and ended. And you can see there's a little bit of a variance where it steps over, and there was about an inch off. That could have been just me not being careful with how I tensioned it when I rolled, because I went down one side across the bottom and up the other. I could have gone down both sides simultaneously, and maybe I wouldn't have had that problem. But again, live and learn. So I enjoyed the process, and I'm really in love with the quilt. I can't always say that I'm in love with something when the first time I did it, but this is a beautiful quilt. It's a beautiful kit, and I'm really thrilled with the finish. So I want to thank you for sticking with us for all of the different steps on this, and I'm looking forward to having it hanging. So thanks for staying with us. I look forward to seeing you next time here in the studio. Until then, take care of yourself and take care of each other.